Just if your assessments, if you got to watch this final briefing by Advocate Shamila Batohi this afternoon.
Yes, Masa, I watched the former NDPP handing over the overview of the last few years' performance, and also indicating the challenges that he had to navigate around the treacherous waters of the NPA and prosecution, as well as the whole criminal justice cluster, where she must place a part of the puzzle, and indicating that she is leaving the ship in the capable hands of the new captain, Ntate Andy Mothibi.
Now, I want to quote something that she said earlier at the briefing, which was that the NPA is on the right path and is stronger, but there are serious issues hindering the NPA from doing its work, calling it unfinished business. We've had this conversation about if 2.5-year tenure of Advocate Mothibi will be enough. Listening to what Advocate Shamila Batohi had to say about the challenges at the NPA, going back to that question, will that be enough?
It won't be enough, Masa, because your strategy as the new person assuming office will definitely be different from the strategy and tactics of the outgoing NDP. Remember that Advocate Andy Mothibi comes with a specialist and knowledge of accounting, and accounting, amongst other things, would speak to the determination of operational budgets and capital expenditure associated with the projects, with the projects that are linked to the successes. Also, Masa, I am definitely sure that knowing Advocate Andy Mothibi, you would project into the next 5 years. You would be looking at the weaknesses, the strengths, the threats to the operations of the NPA, as well as opportunities to hinge on to in a way and manner that would move the stabilized hotspot within the NPA to a normalized and efficiently run NPA. So the new NDPP has a lot to do, and 2 years would not be the necessary amount of time that we have seen him unleash when he was still the head of the Special Investigations Unit. Strengthening the teams becomes one of those things. The human resources factor within the organization, morale, and many of the poison chalices that are being exchanged in various provinces that have created angst amongst South Africans to such an extent that the Lieutenant General Ntantam Kwanazi mentions the NPA as part and parcel of those who would be aiding and abetting criminals and organized crime, to be specific. And we heard 2 months ago, even today, in the presentation of the NDPP, talking about the challenges posed by the organized crime. And you would agree with me that from a transnational organized crime point of view, we are beginning to see an influx or a flood, if you wish, that would speak to the issues of how quick the NPA will prosecute. Will it have the necessary expertise and skill and the resources to prosecute? These are what would be on the planning board of the new NDPP and Andy Mothibi.
And as you mentioned there, you know, some of the things that were mentioned by the KZN Police Commissioner Ntantam Kwanazi, and the NPA is one of those aiding and abetting criminal activities. She said that she wanted to bring those accountable to justice, but they were trying to do what they were trying to do with an airplane that was already in flight, that had issues. And maybe they should have landed that plane and deal with those issues. Now, speaking to some of those issues, what do you think they are, and what do you make of this analogy? Because if we have anything to go by this analogy that she used, Advocate Mothibi is walking into a plane that's already in flight and hasn't been grounded to check out what the issues are, as she says.
The strategy to follow, Masa, from the new book, or Turning Over the Leaf by Advocate Andy Mashaile, one would be to land the plane. Land the plane would mean disrupting the strategies of the organized cliques within the NPA. If I were to use the analogy or the expertise of one of my advisors, Masa, who wrote a book 2,500 years ago, The Art of War. What you would need to do would, in landing the plane, would be to disrupt the cliques and within the NPA itself, which forms point number one in the three-pillar strategy. Disrupt the alliance, the strategy. If you fail to disrupt the strategy of the cliques within the NPA, disrupt the alliances. Alliances would be those that would engage with some of the officials of the NPA, those that would be in the pockets of the criminals and cartels. Disrupt those alliances so as to be able to pinpoint who links with organized crime members outside of the NPA. Thirdly, Sun Tzu says, if you can't do 1 and 2, you do number 3, and number 3 would be to go onto the battlefield. Going onto the battlefield means turning the organization upside down. But knowing Andy Mothibi, you would be methodical, analytical. He's a very strategic and intelligent-minded individual who calculates, who would sit down and do strategic calculations as required or as advised by Sun Tzu in The Art of War, which is chapter 1, fortunately, of the book, which is what Ntate Mothibi would need to do. Do strategic calculations so that your moves are informed by intelligence within your organization. In rebuilding it, at the same time, delivering results to the victims of crime. In the same breath, in satisfying the demanding public of South Africa, so that you can bridge the trust deficit that exists between South Africans and the NPA.
Does he have the arms for this art of war that you speak of? You know, Advocate Batohi speaks quite highly of him, as we've said, being her successor, and very confident in him, but also mentioned that one of the problems at the NPA is that their head doesn't have accounting officer powers. And that was one of the big problems for her in her enforcing her duties. But now Advocate Mothibi is going from being in a position where he did have an accounting officer powers in his role, and now he won't as the head of the NPA. Does she make a solid point there, actually?
Let's flip the coin, Masa, and say the president, when headhunting Advocate Andy Mothibi, knew that Advocate Mothibi has in his blood, in his system, the accounting powers and the skill of accounting officers, and would therefore say to the president, if you want this ship to be successful in sailing these treacherous waters of organized crime and crimes within the criminal justice cluster or system, you would need to listen to the advice that I would provide with my expertise, which is what brought you to me as the president, for me to be able to run, stabilize, and normalize, and efficiently run an NPA. So I am definitely certain that the president will give Ntate Andy Mothibi those accounting powers, even though that it might not be official. I am sure when we talk about these things, some of the advisors of the president, and if the president is watching, he will realize that for Andy Mothibi to be successful, he would need to account so that he can determine the budget. He can congregate resources so that he can galvanize them in the war against crime and in the war against organized crime and transnational organized crime that is becoming an existential threat to South Africa.
Yeah, otherwise his hands will also be tied. Now, just going back to Advocate Batohi's final report today, she was quite diplomatic on the matter of political interference that she may have experienced. Did you expect her to say or reveal any more on this? When she initially mentioned political interference, I mean, last year sometime, it all went topsy-turvy and then she kind of retreated a bit. Did you think this being her last day, she'd be a little less diplomatic about it?
No, Masa. If you have bent your finger, you have made that statement that there's interference, and you receive a telephone call behind the scenes, you would know that as you retire now, you might have to be called to another area because of your expertise, or you might still be looking for a job within those spheres that has politicians in and around them. So you would not be reckless because it is your last day.
Andy Mashaile, thank you so much. Always such a pleasure to get your insights. That is a security strategist, Andy Mashaile, just sharing his insights on today's happenings.